Hey, Randy Joe here, and welcome back to the channel, where if you've been following, we have listened at this point to the entire Pink Floyd discography. That's right, every single album in chronological order. We started with Piper at the Gates of Dawn and listened to each record all the way to The Endless River, of course, which, if you don't see up on the channel, it's because it's the only album of theirs that for some reason is completely blocked from being viewed in the public eye. That video unfortunately will not see the light of day on my channel. However, if you want to see it and you really are interested in Endless River, or you want to see any of the other reactions I've done to Pink Floyd in their full extent, check out the Patreon in the description down below. For $5 a month, you get every single video I have done unedited, so all the reactions from, Pink Floyd. But if you don't want to, of course, spend the $5 a month, that's completely fair and understandable. Check out the playlist as well, which is linked below. That'll show you the edited versions, of course, on the main channel here of every single Pink Floyd reaction. But since we are now finished the Pink Floyd discography, you saw the title here, we are now, of course, doing the tier list. We are going to tier out the entire discography from Piper at the Gates of Dawn onwards. One by one, we'll go through each record, talk about them a little bit, why they're receiving such a tier from myself, and as well as it being a tier list, it's also a ranking video, a very loose ranking video in a sense, but I am ranking these from best to worst. And don't get it twisted, there are certain records of theirs that are very noticeably better than others, one of which is behind me right now, and is certainly, in my opinion, not just the best Pink Floyd record, but also easily one of the best albums I've ever heard, period. Without further ado, let's get into the tier list here. Here it is. You see it on the screen. Of course, we start with the highest tier. There's S, there's A, B, C, D, E, F. You know how a tier list works. You don't really need me to explain it here. So without further ado, let's just get into it with, of course, their debut record. This is the first of two records of the Syd Barrett era. Syd Barrett was the lead frontman. Pink Floyd really could be split up into three distinct eras, those being the Syd Barrett album with the first two LPs, then of course the Roger Waters era, and then the David Gilmour era after Roger Waters had left the band. So the Syd Barrett era, certainly has a lot of fans. It gets a lot of attention still. It's still very much a praised era of Pink Floyd. It's not my personal favorite era, but I have a lot of respect for this record here. I think the kind of abstract lullaby-esque tone that Syd Barrett kind of works with is very interesting. It's very psychedelic and very childlike in a way, while kind of showing a lot of his deeper issues with his psyche. And I think really at the end of the day, there's a lot to appreciate here. Interstellar Overdrive, I think it's the clear standout. It's almost 10 minutes. And I do really enjoy the kind of jammy nature of that track. I think it shows a little bit more of the kind of extended elements that the band would, of course, venture into much further with Roger Waters. And the opening track as well on this one, Astronomy Domain, is a fantastic kind of opening cut that, again, really shows the distinct nature of Syd Barrett's era here. And I think tracks like The Gnome or The Scarecrow or even Loose for Sam, again, highlight Syd Barrett's very childlike sort of songwriting that was very distinct, very psychedelic, and, in some ways maybe a touch disturbed, while still retaining a certain element of innocence. That being said, I know a lot of people love this record. It certainly has its diehard fans, but I definitely don't think this is one of Pink Floyd's best. I have a lot of respect for Syd Barrett as a musician. I think he, again, had a very different approach to music than the rest of the band did, which kind of makes the first two records kind of unique in a sense, but again, not personally my favorite. I definitely think it's better than what an average album would be, but for me, if I'm being honest with you, we're going to sit it right at B tier. Because, again, it's a solid debut, but there was some room for improvement, in my opinion. Going on to the next LP, Saucerful of Secrets. Now, here is maybe my one of my first hot takes. Syd Barrett here, he's a little bit more kind of loose with the recording from what I read. He seemed like he was already starting to have issues. The band was starting to, I think, question his sanity perhaps. But still, Saucerful of Secrets, to me, is actually an improvement on what the debut had. I think there is a lot to kind of unpack here. I think the more psychedelic, more extended nature really shines through, especially on that title track, Saucerful of Secrets, which I think is a really unique and interesting track. Yes, the playing is at times maybe a bit messy from what I've read. Some people don't personally love some of the recording of it. But, you know, when I think about this track at what it is at its core, I think it kind of retains a lot of the DNA that Pink Floyd would continue to kind of sculpt around. And I feel like when you hear it on some of the live versions, for example, on an album that, again, we'll cover, of course, in this tier list, the live versions, though, of Saucerful of Secrets do show the incredible chemistry of the band, in my opinion. And I think that track specifically, well, again, maybe not perfect, maybe, you know, some of the playing is a little off at times and isn't as sharp as it would later be. I think the chemistry here is certainly showing its appeal. But even without that track, there are some other tracks here that, again, I really enjoy the kind of atmospheric nature of. Set the Controls for the Sun, for example, in my opinion, has an incredible atmosphere that is very unique and, again, showcases a lot of the band's potential that they would tap into a much further into the discography. I also really enjoy the tracks Jugaband Blues as well as Corporal Clegg. That one specifically, for some reason, to me, really does feel like Syd Barrett's best version of these lullaby-like nursery rhyme-esque psychedelic trips. That Corporal Clegg is especially distinct, in my opinion, of that nature. Saucerful of Secrets is certainly still a fairly messy record. I think, you know, if Syd Barrett was able to get the help that he needed and maybe got a lot more focus when it came to his music and honed it in a lot more, there could have been a truly incredible record from him. You know, I do have to listen to his solo work. Unfortunately, I never got around to it. But still, you know, I think he had some untapped potential that, you know, really just showed the surface with these first two LPs. But at the very least, I think with him as the kind of main lead here, he was able to kind of craft up a little bit of a loose sound that the band would later use as a blueprint after he had left. So in some ways, his legacy continued to live on in the rest of their music to some extent. You know, that being said, though, I do think this is better than Piper at the Gates of Dawn. But again, I'm not saying it's a full... You know, again, I'm not the biggest Syd Barrett era fan. Again, I think there was a lot more room for improvement that unfortunately just never occurred. I do think it is better, though, like I said, than Piper at the Gates of Dawn. These are both records that I would give, you know, a solid 7 to. And I know that might be, you know, a bit of a hot take, but if 5 is your average record, you neither dislike it or you neither love it, then I do like these records, certainly a lot more than I dislike them, sitting at a 7 out of 10 each. But, again, some room for improvement. Then we've got More. Now, More is an interesting record. It's a soundtrack to a film, I believe of the same name, and is a lot more, no pun intended, stripped back, a lot more acoustic-led on some of these tracks, which I really did enjoy. It's not necessarily, again... I feel like Pink Floyd really didn't come into their prime until a certain record that we're getting to pretty soon. But again, this one, they're really struggling at this point to find their sound. Syd Barrett has pretty much left the band at this point, from what I gather. He either was in and out of the studio or was just completely not involved in the creation of this LP, in which that kind of forced Waters and the rest of the members here, Gilmore and such, to try to hone in and, you know, create a continued sound with what Syd Barrett had already crafted while still trying to feel unique and original to themselves. The acoustic-led moments of the LP, in my opinion, are where this shines. But for the most part, this is not better, I would say, than the first two records. Green is the Color is really the only track here that I find myself coming back to. I think it's a pretty strong track, to be honest, for their first half of their discography before they really took off. Green is the Color is really the only track that I come back to and is really the only track that I find to be the most appealing on this record. I just think the overall lyricism of that track and the atmosphere and the softness of it is, you know, really the strongest element of the LP. But for the most part, this thing is a little bit more, again, complicated, The band is in a complete disarray, and Syd Barrett's DNA is still on this thing, but certainly not to the extent that it was on the first two LPs. And none of the members here feel particularly as, I would say invested in a vision as they would come to be later on. So this one to me is a pretty just average record, because none of it's particularly awful, but none of it is particularly spectacular, other than I think Green is the Color being a pretty great track in its own right. Then we've got the infamous, I should say, Ummagumma, however you like to pronounce it. The band pronounces it in varying ways, and the band and the fans aren't particularly keen on this one. I split this one up into two reactions because it's a double LP, the first side being the live side, and the second side being the studio side, where they try to create their own certain visions of each member, pretty much solo in a sense. You've got Nick Mason's track, you've got the Roger Waters track, you've got the Gilmore track, and of course you have the Richard Wright track, which, again, if you know me and you followed the channel so far, I'm a big Richard Wright fan. Unfortunately, those four tracks from the solo musicians, in a sense, on that side, they're not great. None of them are particularly great. In fact, I would say they're all just kind of mood setters and varying sounds that, to some extent, maybe work in crafting a certain sense of anxiety or dread. And there are times where, maybe there is a bit of a unique effect here and there where it feels like they're trying to do something unique and bold, but it never quite comes together as one whole piece. All these tracks feel very disconnected within themselves. And each of those four tracks really just feel like a mishmash of ideas that never truly come together. That being said, the live side of this thing is honestly great. I love the live side of Ummagumma. I think Ummagumma has a impeccable live side. The Saucerful of Secrets one, for example, to me is really the best version of the song that I've heard. Never checked out live at Pompeii, but I know the live side of this, to me, does show just how great the band is together. But the studio side shows how bad they are apart. They haven't fully found their own distinct styles and sounds yet to really be solo musicians, I would say. But, most people will say this is their worst record, and I don't think it's their worst. That live side is still pretty great in my opinion, but it's not their best. I'm going to set this one, I'm not too sure the more I think about this, because that live side, like I said, is great, but it's not original, material. It's not new material. Syd Barrett's legacy is at least shining through on that live side, but the studio side, if you just take it for what it is there, that is easily some of the worst work in the discography. Easily, I would say. Like, actually atrocious, that studio side is, the more I think about it. But the live side is great. We're going to set it right here. It's less than mid. It's under a C. It's not a great record by any means. It's more bad than it is good, but that live side kind of redeems a little bit, and they did include it. So technically speaking, it is part of the official album. We can't discredit it just because it's older material being kind of repurposed. Maybe they knew the live stuff was better than what they had already crafted solo. Moving on, Atom Heart Mother. Boop, 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 boop. Get that big old cow up there. I think Atom Heart Mother, it's fine. It's a little forgettable. I feel like I've been kind of ripping apart the album so far, but the opening track, Atom Heart Mother, is a huge 24-minute opus. I think it shows a lot of the ideas again that they would craft much further in a couple of LPs from now on Meddle. I think Atom Heart Mother is really just a mishmash, again, of ideas, but certainly more honed in. If you look at the studio side of Ummagumma, where all four members are kind of apart and trying to come up with their own vision in these kind of massive tracks, then Atom Heart Mother is the one where the whole band comes together and says, okay, what if we're unified as one, trying to come up with a large, massive, scaled track in the same vein. And what you get is, a track that is kind of interesting and shows the chemistry of the band, which is very tight, but for the most part is, still not a fully focused project. And really, the only tracks on here, aside from Atom Heart Mother, that have any reason to come back to would be the tracks If, as well as Summer 68, where they talk about the creation of the band and really the formation from what I gather. And, those tracks, again, are decent enough. I like the acoustic elements of the LP, but for the most part, this is another record that I think is just kind of forgettable, bland, just kind of teases, again, the band trying to craft and come together with their own sound that is unique and powerful. And while this album, doesn't necessarily have lows as low as the second side of Ummagumma, it does end with Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which I think is just another weird exploration into what is essentially a sound collage at times. And it doesn't always work. It doesn't land. It's, I guess, a little experimental. I give them props for trying something still outside the norm when they were still emerging, but it's not great. And the only my favorite thing about this, if I'm being honest with you, my favorite thing about this record is the cover. I love this big cow. I think it's a cute cover, and I like the more kind of optimistic and acoustic kind of led moments of this LP, but it's not my favorite. So we're gonna drop this one. It's better than Ummagumma, and if I'm being honest, it's not quite as good as More, which is not particularly brilliant album either. So let's move those over. There we go. It's above Ummagumma, but it's still, to me, a less than average record. I just actually, you know what? I'll give it a solid 5 out of 10. We'll pop it up here. It's not as good as More. It's better than Ummagumma. It's just okay. Don't love it. Don't hate it. I forget about it half the time. But when I remember it, I remember If, Summer 68, and that album cover. And the bloated opening track is bloated, but has some distinct moments. Okay, finally, now that we're past that first era, to me, that's the end of the first era. Syd Barrett kind of did his lead with, of course, those first 2 LPs. The following 3 LPs are very messy. The chemistry of the band is a little bit all over the place, but slowly getting better, track by track, album by album. Atom Heart Mother does feel like the LP where they're really starting to come together as one and, find their sound, find a certain more direction that is a lot more proggy and unique. And then they put out, of course, Meddle. Now, this is an ear, for those that aren't aware. This is an ear for the album cover. Let's put it right there. And Meddle, in my opinion, is the first truly great album of Pink Floyd. This is where they found their sound. It's very obvious. Like, the difference between Atom Heart Mother and this LP is like night and day. The whole band is together here. The chemistry feels equal parted. It doesn't even feel like this album is necessarily a Waters-led project or a Gilmour-led project or whoever else you'd like to point to in the band. Richard Wright is on here quite a bit. I would say the band here is actually the most equal that they ever kind of are in the rest of their discography. They really do feel like they are sharing the album's efforts, and they're all putting on their best efforts at the same time. This leads, of course, to not only an incredible, stellar first half of the LP, but ends it with Echoes, a 23-minute masterpiece that has a slow kind of build with this gentle chime-like effect that is very hypnotic. And as it kind of swirls around and comes together and pummels you in the last half of it, it feels so epic and grandiose. And the lyrics as well, the vocals that come through too, are very psychedelic and showcases the very unique vocals that they have as well, putting this nice hushed effect on the whole thing. Echoes is brilliant, like a 10 out of 10, perfect track, one of the best tracks in the Pink Floyd discography, and is really the standout moment to showcase the band's potential. Easily one of the best moments, in the discography in general. But we can't forget the first, few tracks on here. One of These Days has an incredible instrumental, again, showcasing the chemistry. It's very pummeling. It's very heavy, maybe some of the heaviest stuff they have done in general. That kind of disturbed, mutilated vocal that I believe is Nick Mason slides into the mix, saying one of these days he's going to cut you into little pieces in this really disturbed, kind of twisted, mutilated vocal that just feels like some, orc or something. And it's really just a really great pummeling open. But aside from that track, you also have Fearless, has a really great climbing sound to it before it kind of comes back down. A Pillow of Winds showcases a much more gentler side. It's a really great contrast to that opening that is so heavy and monumental. And then also, we can't forget Saint-Tropez, which is very kind of laid back and bluesy, and it has a nice kind of chill vibe to it, something that I feel like they would continue on. When I listen to Saint-Tropez, for example, I feel like I am just out on the town having a good night. Maybe the stars are shining, the lights are beaming on the town. It feels very atmospheric. I think Saint-Tropez is maybe one of my favorite tracks, on the LP, if it weren't for Echoes. Echoes to me is great, obviously a perfect track, but Saint-Tropez is the second track that I would pick out in here as a true element of what they're capable of. The only track here I don't love is Seamus, where you have a dog crying on the mix, and it's just about a dog, I believe, and it's one I often skip. I don't really want to hear it. I just want to get right to Echoes after I finish with Saint-Tropez. But yeah, this one's certainly an A tier album though. Incredible album. A solid 8 to a 9 even on a good day. Just a brilliant LP, an absolutely brilliant LP, where they have finally come through with a record that to me feels fully formed, and the band share a certain sense of chemistry that is just kind of above and beyond. The whole band feels like they are unified, finally. I would say before this, they're just so at ends with one another, but this one's the one where they are finally all together. After this, they have another album that is, again, a little bit more, I guess you could say, of a misfire, but it's not a bad record. I think this is a quieter release. I don't see a lot of people talking about this one, not being obscured by clouds. There's nothing wrong with this one. To me, it reminds me a lot of, for example, their album More, where it seems like they are trying out different sounds. It's a lot more atmospheric, a lot more ambient in a sense, which is something they are certainly going to craft much further in the discography coming up. But again, it's not necessarily, I would say, a memorable LP. A lot of these tracks are purely instrumental, and they're really tone setters and mood setters that are, there to kind of set the stage. And if there's one thing I'll say from it, is that the production on here is pretty clean for the most part, and again showcases the chemistry of the band, because none of the tracks here are particularly bad. I feel like it exists to sort of just set up what they would do later on. It's not bad, it's not great. It's another one that I would set right in the C tier, right here. Again, not perfect, better than Atom Heart Mother. Going on though, let's talk about, of course, this is the one. This is the big one. We are talking finally. I feel like this took forever to get here. I mean, it did take a while for them to truly take off, that's for sure. We are talking about the most iconic album perhaps of all time. This album cover has been, in countless posters, shirts, pieces of media. It's been referenced a gazillion times. It's been parodied a million times in the same way that maybe Abbey Road would be. And it's a masterpiece. This is an incredible 10 out of 10 album. Dark Side of the Moon, of course, is what I'm talking about here. I did not say the title. I forgot. But Dark Side of the Moon, the pacing on this thing, my God. I have always wanted to talk about pacing. I want to do a full video on it at some point in time, maybe one day. But if we're talking about records with perfect pacing, I really don't know if there is a record I can think of with perhaps better pacing than Dark Side of the Moon. It flies by. The ease from track to track to track, changing up the tones and styles. You get the more kind of bluesy and kind of dirtier sort of cuts on tracks like Money, for example, which are just as catchy as they are kind of grimy. You have the incredibly powerful and uplifting The Great Gig in the Sky, as things pierce through the sky and sing very operatically almost. by the female vocalist I'm forgetting the name of. I'll quickly put it right here. She comes into the cut as well, and just soars far above what is already an incredibly psychedelic and beautiful passage by the musicians here. Of course, the whole band providing this incredible instrumental. And on top of that, the themes on this record of time and death and politics and money, the sense of urgency, a lot of these tracks as well. This thing is just perfectly paced. Every track is incredible. The production on here is as sharp as it'll ever be in the discography. I think this might be the best produced album from them without sounding overproduced or over-manufactured in a sense. And the overall airy atmosphere, for example, that first track, Breathe in the Air, just feels uplifting and hypnotic and psychedelic, and really just spacey. It really capitalizes on that space rock trend that was popular in the 60s and came into the 70s, and Pink Floyd, in my opinion, mastered it on Dark Side of the Moon. There's really only a couple of moments in the entire Pink Floyd discography to me as well that really top the title drop of this LP with that last track, singing out Dark Side of the Moon. It hits especially hard and everything really comes together, and it feels like such a grand just finale and opus. And while it isn't necessarily my distinct specific favorite part in the entire discography, which we will get to in a album coming up, it is certainly one of the best moments in the discography to really stick the landing that they set up. Because again, when it does hit that title drop, it feels like at that point in time, the band has basically perfectly set up piece by piece by piece this moment to perfectly climax and match the sort of momentum of that title drop. So Dark Side of the Moon, perfect. I'll say it officially here now. We're going to put it on the tier list, but this is, in my opinion, a 10 out of 10 record, if it's not obvious enough, and is not my favorite in the discography, believe it or not. It's a 10 out of 10 record, one of multiple, maybe in their discography, but for a 10 out of 10 record, to me, this is their second best. Dark Side of the Moon, sitting at S tier. Are you surprised? No, you're not. But moving on, let's get to Wish You Were Here. I think this is one of the highest rated albums on Rate Your Music. It's in the top 5 of all time. Of every album ever released, Wish You Were Here has achieved a top 5 status online on the Rate Your Music platform. If I'm being honest with you, I don't agree with that placement of Wish You Were Here. I think this is an incredible album. Don't get me wrong. I think this one is easily one of the best albums in their discography. I don't think it's as good as Dark Side of the Moon, but I do think, it is a very personal album. It feels very hard-hitting, addressing, of course, the Syd Barrett relationship and, of course, Wish You Were Here being a tribute to him. And, of course, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, the, 2-part track, or I guess you could say it's multi-part track, really. But those 2 tracks that kind of bookend the album are also tributes to, of course, the incredible, influential, and important Syd Barrett from the first couple of records before, of course, he unfortunately went a little mad. But that very ambient, kind of transcendental sound, continues on from Dark Side of the Moon onto this one. And where that record, to me, feels like it is much more diverse when it comes to the themes. It is much more expanded upon and kind of reaches into every other territory. This one does feel a lot more honed in and focused on themes of loss and grief and trying to kind of mourn the loss of a friend who, although not passed from life itself, has metaphorically kind of moved on from the band. And at this point in time, with such a massive sense of fame and attention as well after Dark Side of the Moon, it's obvious that they do wish Syd Barrett was with them to achieve such fame and glory. But there are tracks on here that I'm not particularly fond of, if I'm being honest with you. I do think Welcome to the Machine is just okay. It is a track that feels like it is kind of unfinished and isn't as fleshed out as it could be. And every time I listen to this record in full, Welcome to the Machine does feel like it doesn't really belong on the record, especially with just how emotional a lot of this LP is. Have a Cigar, though, again, while not fitting the theme of the record, is amazing. I will say that. I love the theme of addressing their fame and how these big wigs from the upper labels, for example, are trying to show their support while obviously being in it all for the money. And I really just like the overall kind of swagger of that track, the overall sort of tone that just feels so confident and cool and collected. You know, really showcases the kind of bluesy elements in a sense that the band kind of touches on, and feels very, I always say, casino-esque. I feel like I am certainly out on the town, similar to Saint-Tropez in a way. It has a similar tone and setting of that one from Meddle. But again, Wish You Were Here is incredible. Now, throwing it up on the tier list, though, like I said, incredible album, fantastic album, timeless album. Love the themes. It hits hard, and it is, certainly one of their best. I don't think, like I said, I don't think it's a top 5 album of all time. I do think Dark Side of the Moon is better than it, but I do think this is a smidge, a very slight smidge better than Meddle. I heavily debated putting it underneath Meddle because to me they are pretty close, but I think Meddle's production isn't as sharp or as clean. And even though I do think the track Echoes is pretty much better than almost anything on Wish You Were Here, I do think that Wish You Were Here is overall a much more consistent record, and is overall more of a grand album that does stick the landing much stronger. I feel like as an entire album front to back, Wish You Were Here just edges out Meddle ever so slightly. Moving on, we've got the one and only Animals. 1977, I believe this came out. Let's talk Animals. Right here in the background, I also have a CD copy as well. Thrifted that bad boy for like $2. Probably their darkest album. Very disturbed, sort of dark atmosphere on it. I love every track on here, but if I'm being honest, it's one of the greatest albums of all time. It's a 10 out of 10 record. It's better than Dark Side of the Moon. There is no moment in the entire Pink Floyd discography that peaks and is better than that bleeding and babbling "We Fell on His Neck with a Scream," that part from Sheep. That is a perfect moment. To me, I get goosebumps when I hear that track, when Sheep really just comes down and it beats on you and it's battling and it's just brutal with those drum works too from Nick Mason. I can't even pretend that this record is not good. It is a 10 out of 10 record. It is a perfect album. It is one of my favorite albums of all time now. I love Sheep. I love Dogs. I love Pigs. I think Pigs on the Wing 1 and 2 perfectly bookend this thing with a sense of sincerity and maybe optimism and a sweetness to it, while those first 3 middle tracks are so dark and brooding and disturbed and tortured in a way, and very political and feel very relevant to today's political climate, which is continually faltering. I love this album. I think Sheep, could be interpreted in a couple of ways too. It could be seen as a very dark and depressing admission of defeat, kind of being stuck in this endless cycle. That's the most often interpretation I have seen. But in my eyes, it's actually more of an optimistic ending as the Sheep kind of rise against the Dogs and maybe, hopefully, the Pigs as well, and create a revolution and maybe move to a political climate that is a lot more for the people and is much more, truly unified as one, tearing down the oppressors. That bleeding and battling moment in Sheep, to me, is the best part of the discography. And I could just talk about this album and gush about it for the entire video. I'm sure Animals will come up a lot more on the channel in conversation on here, or maybe a whole video dedicated to it. But if it's not clear already, I love this album. I think it's perfect. And really, the pacing, the grooves of this thing are so hypnotic. It's got such a slow kind of gradual grip on your mind, with each track having a very distinct, unique riff that really takes hold and carries on from beginning to end and then kind of segues into the next track. I also really love the use of the effects of the dogs barking, the sheep's bleeding and babbling, as well as the oinks from the pigs on the track Pigs. There's nothing more I can say about this thing. It's perfect. I feel like I'm running in circles mentally here as I talk about it, but it is an album that I love and I adore, and I've probably listened to it more than any other Pink Floyd album. And I will admit, I maybe have an obsession with it at this point because I do want to get it even tatted on my body. That's how much I love this album. I'm going to quit my gushing. It's a perfect album. It's a 10 out of 10 album. Bleeding and Babbling, We Fell on His Neck with a Scream is incredible. An incredible line, incredible delivery, the way it echoes and goes into the instrumental itself, his vocal becoming one with the kind of like synth. It's so twisted. Richard Wright is incredible on here. Nick Mason is incredible on here, and they are underdogs, in my opinion, of the band, so it's great to see them come through. And, of course, Gilmour is doing his thing, as he always does, and Waters lyrically is, in my opinion, maybe at his best on this LP. Animals is perfect. Dark Side of the Moon, get over here. You're second best. Let's be honest here. I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna chill out a bit. Maybe got ahead of myself. Moving on. We're on The Wall. If you have seen my video, my reaction for The Wall, I've already heard this album before checking out the Pink Floyd discography. And, when I first heard it years ago, I thought it was pretty much perfect. I really liked the narrative of this LP. I really liked the instrumentals. I thought it was a pretty strong record overall, but I've always been a bit mixed on that second half of the record where things take a drastic turn and get a lot darker, and the character of Pink, who at this point has blocked himself from the world and had this wall metaphorically built in his mind, escapes his isolation from a hotel room and goes on like a drug-fueled right-wing kind of slaughter of his fans in a sense. I don't love that second half. I think it falls apart in the second half. If you've seen my video, I get pretty critical of the whole record, maybe the most critical of any Pink Floyd album I've covered so far, because I was already familiar with it. So I was able to break it down a lot easier. And, I still stand by what I said. I do think it's a good album. I don't think it's necessarily a great album. I like it a lot less than most people, if I'm being honest with you. I think it could be cut in half. I think it could be shortened. I think the second half of the record, like I said, is very bloated, while having a lot of great riffs. Also just has a lot of really forgettable short tracks that really just exist to pad out the narrative. I don't know. It's just not my favorite. There's a lot of ideas on here. I don't love the more theatrical element that Waters goes into. I think the trial gets to the point of being kind of clumsy and tacky and humorous, and not in a good way. I really don't love the trial. I think it is supposed to be the climax of the record and the peak of the record where the wall comes down. But to me, it's almost like truly just a Broadway musical at that point, and honestly, not a very good one. Comfortably Numb is a solid track. Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, obviously iconic, a great track. I think Mother is the true best track on The Wall. But for the most part, a lot of the tracks on here are just so, needless and only really exist to kind of create this narrative. And while the narrative at times is interesting and relatable, certainly, I also feel like, there isn't really much reason for some of these tracks to exist other than to just continue to add on to backstory that is just kind of forgettable to me. I also, again, really don't think the stark turn towards right-wing and kind of fascism in the second half stick the landing very well. I think it should be a much more gradual turn, and it comes way too out of left field for my liking. While I do think that is certainly something that a lot of artists and human beings can relate to, you still see it today with people falling down the right-wing pipeline. I don't think it's as gradual as it should be on the record. So, for me, it's okay. It's a good album. Don't get me wrong. It is an album that I would put it above B, but below A. It's going to be above, of course, the Syd Barrett ones. Again, I'm not the biggest Syd Barrett fan, but that's where The Wall is going to end up. I'm going to put it between A and B because, if I were to give it a numerical rating, to me, it's like a solid, 7 to an 8 sort of record. I don't think it's perfect. It certainly has a lot of problems. I don't love the very theatrical element of it, which also, while we're on it, I think the first side of this record and the second side of this record, like I've been saying, are so different in tone as well. Like, the first half is much more serious and grounded and showcases this wall being built, whereas the second side, like I said, becomes comical and theatrical to the point where it feels like two different albums. It's very distinct, that difference, as you get into the second half. And I don't love it. I just think it could be done a lot better, a lot more condensed in a way, while at the same time showing a more gradual turn. Moving on, we've got the final cut, which is essentially The Wall Part 2. It's a much more fragmented version of it, I guess you would say. Carries on a lot of the same ideas of the war, specifically the Falkland Wars being covered on this one. And there are certain things I like about this one. The Gunner's Dream is great. The Hero's Return as well. I really like a lot of the ideas of dissecting war and trauma and how war affects not just the people within it, but people affected by it in terms of family. I think it's a very interesting record. It's not as focused maybe as The Wall, and it does feel like some of The Wall leftovers. I know it was created around the same sort of time and with the same mindset, but it's pretty obvious at this point that Waters has completely taken control. He was very kind of, for what I gather, rude to Gilmour, disregarding a lot of his ideas and saying he doesn't contribute enough to the band. And it's just an okay record. It's, again, not one I come back to. I just think Hero's Return and Gunner's Dream are both the true standout moments from it. And I would have honestly preferred an entire narrative of a soldier gone to war becoming a gunner and the trauma that affects him afterwards. I think that would be a more unique and interesting narrative if they expanded on the Gunner's Dream. Just okay. I don't have much to say about this one. It's not really one I come back to, so I don't even want to spend too much time on it. I will say the theatrical moments, the more Broadway-esque moments, are dropped for the most part on here. And it does feel like they are a lot more grounded on this LP. But I don't love it. I don't find myself wanting to come back to this record. To me, I would actually put it between B and C, right there. Yeah, that feels appropriate. Because, I think the Syd Barrett records are better than this. I think his vision is more unique and interesting and captured better overall than a lot of the work on the final cut. I think The Wall, while again, I don't personally love the album, I do think the vision and the narrative is more interesting and showcases better moments of the record than the final cut does. And the final cut just feels like a mishmash of ideas, considering the album was at a point in time when the band was certainly in more disarray. We've got Momentary Lapse of Reason. Boom, boom, boom. Thrown up here. So now, at this point, final cut's dropped, and Roger Waters says, I'm done. I'm out. Gilmour, I can't handle you anymore. I hate you. Sorry. Bye-bye. He doesn't even say sorry. He just says, see you later, and bails on the band. And, of course, this created a very difficult transition for the band. Gilmour took lead and attempted to approach songwriting himself here and take full creative control with Momentary Lapse of Reason. And similar to Final Cut, it does feel like the band does not really like each other. It's very messy. It doesn't really feel as focused as a lot of their other work. But if there's one thing I do like about it, it's that it feels like it retreads on a lot of the kind of 70s atmosphere from the mid-70s, those being Dark Side of the Moon to Animals, which is a much more kind of groove-based tone that they felt like they had at the time. And while those records felt more depressing and dark in tone, Momentary Lapse of Reason, despite the kind of faltering band here, does feel a little bit more optimistic. There's a certain sense of freedom that comes through. Gilmour feels like he has maybe a sense of optimism within him as he takes hold of the band, and tracks like Learning to Fly kind of showcase that. But at the same time, Learning to Fly is really the only, great track here. The rest of the LP is just okay, because Gilmour is not necessarily the strongest songwriter of the group. And, at the end of the day, Waters is certainly a much better songwriter, I would say, than Gilmour. But other than Learning to Fly, a lot of this album to me is another record where I just don't find myself wanting to revisit it. all that often. I think most of the tracks are quite forgettable, if I'm being honest with you. In fact, I can't really remember too many of the tracks on here other than Learning to Fly, which is, again, has a nice, great, powerful, unified atmosphere on it where the band does feel like they are trying to dig themselves out of the ashes. That metaphor of them learning to fly on their own certainly comes through. But this is worse than Final Cut for sure. Like a noticeable downgrade here. I would actually go as far to say, too, that I prefer Obscured by Clouds. I prefer Atom Heart Mother over this, which is maybe a hot take, but I would say I guess I would take this over Ummagumma because that studio side's atrocious on Ummagumma. And then we have the Division Bell. Can we bring that to the front, please? The Division Bell, at this point, like I said, Waters is gone. Gilmour is still creative lead, but this time he brings on his wife and says, hey, can you help me with the songwriting? I'm not the greatest songwriter. And she says, okay, of course. And she pens, some of the best material, actually the best material in general, post Waters. Waters leaves and, she slides in. But I really like the more alt-rock territory they go in. I feel like they embrace a lot of the bands of the time. U2, for example, really does come through in terms of the influences that they take on. Cluster 1 is like this really powerful opening instrumental, whereas What Do You Want From Me has, Gilmour's vocals feeling a lot more focused and honed in and has some of his best vocal performances, I would say, as well. Still showcasing just that he is still a talented figure in his own right when he is being helped out from another, that of course being his wife. Marooned is a brilliant track that got a Grammy for good reason. It is brilliant once again. I love the track Wearing the Inside Out, and I especially love the last track here, High Hopes, in which, the entire discography does feel like it is closed out with that, cascading finish. The proggy elements feel like they come back into the mix a lot stronger on the record with this final cut. And as all the lyrics are sort of chanted out in this kind of monumental fashion, everything kind of cascading over one another, it does feel like an end credits of sorts. Maybe there's a sense of sadness to it all, a bittersweet finish. I just love how climactic this finish feels, and it does feel like a great way to wrap up the discography and leave things on a nice high note to end, of course, such a massive legacy. That is, of course, if this was the last record, which it's not. It should have been. Division Bell, to me, is a perfect last album. It's a great swan song in a way. It feels like it retreads on a lot of the same grounds and themes. It even sometimes even interpolates some of the same kind of riffs and tones from earlier on in their discography, while still feeling unique and refreshing, and again, carrying on some of the influences from other bands of the 90s and 80s. So with that being said, I do think this is the best Gilmour-led LP. I think his songwriting on here from his wife really comes through. I think this is actually better than, maybe a hot take, The Wall. I think this is better than The Wall. I'm going to put this in the A tier right up here. There it is. But then we get to what is the last record. Division Bell should have been the last record. It ends on a perfectly great high note. The music is certainly peaked on there in that final track. It feels very bittersweet. It feels like they are saying goodbye to their legacy, and it's beautiful. Can't say the same for their final LP, Endless River. This one came out a full decade after, the Division Bell, actually almost 2 decades after. I believe this came out in 2013, and I guess Gilmour needed a paycheck because this thing, it's not on the channel, my reaction, because YouTube blocked it, but maybe that's a good thing because Endless River is actually the worst album in the discography, without a doubt. It's not even close. Here's the thing. People want to say Ummagumma is the worst album of Pink Floyd. People want to say Momentary, Lapse of Reason is the worst album of Pink Floyd. And while I understand some of the complaints that come through, Endless River isn't just the fact that it is creatively bankrupt in a lot of ways. It's just boring. Like, they have all the money and it has the clean production on it. Don't get me wrong, the production on this thing is very sharp, and the overall ambient tone that this record embraces and takes on, should be right up their alley considering what they were capable of the past with just atmosphere alone. And Gilmour is still a great player, don't get me wrong. To have all of these capabilities of, almost unlimited expense, perfect production in a sense, great musicians all working together, there's no reason this record should be bad. Actually, it'd be better if it was just a complete misfire of a record. Instead, it's just boring. It's bland. It feels like a Pink Floyd knockoff band, and not a very good one at that. It honestly does feel, in a sense, like somebody went on an AI program and asked a robot to try to create an ambient Pink Floyd record, because there's only one track on here with lyrics, and it's not a very good one. It's also just kind of there. Like, I don't know if there's a single album I can think of off the top of my head right now that feels like it was given a lot of opportunities to it and feels like it should kind of stick the landing, and just comes out being so completely uninspired, bland, forgettable, really just the true extent of going in one ear and out the other. Endless River, it just sucks. It really does just suck. I don't have anything to say about it. To me, when we're talking about, albums and the quality of music and what makes art objectively good, the worst thing you can be is boring. I think it's actually worse than putting out a atrocious record or an embarrassing record or something that just doesn't stick the landing. Putting out a record that has everything going for it and to be as bland and as boring as Endless River is worse than just putting out a bad album. It's a severe slap in the face, and this does feel like a slap in the face to the Pink Floyd discography, because there is nothing about it that really should exist. And for that, we're going to put it right in the F category. I actually think this thing is abysmal. I think it's embarrassing. It's not embarrassing in a it's so bad it's good kind of thing. It's just bad. Like, this is just it's just nothing. I don't know if there's any record I can think of that takes up as much time as this. It's over an hour long, and feels like I didn't hear anything at all at the same time. So, Endless River, F tier for sure. It's awful. But that does it for the tier list. Quickly, let's address the ranking. That means of their 15 records, in dead last place, as it should be, is 15th place, Endless River. Coming in 14th place is Ummagumma. Coming in 13th place is Momentary Lapse of Reason. 12th in the Pink Floyd discography is Atom Heart Mother. 11th place is More. 10th place is Obscured by Clouds. Then we're getting to the 9th place. This is a little bit better than the norm, a little better than the average record maybe. That, of course, being The Final Cut. Then we get to some solid 7 out of 10 records, that being the Syd Barrett era with Piper at the Gates of Dawn at 8th place. At 7th place, we have Saucerful of Secrets. In my opinion, showcases the band's direction a little bit more. Syd Barrett feels like he is a little bit more honed in while still clearly kind of losing it a little bit. 6th place is The Wall. Coming in at 5th place is The Division Bell. I think David Gilmour's best record, in that era. And then in 4th place, of course, is Meddle, where the band does really feel like they are unified. 3rd place is Wish You Were Here. 2nd place is Dark Side of the Moon, a classic, a masterpiece, of course. But in their 1st place, number 1, the best Pink Floyd album ever made, and one of the best rock albums, one of the best albums in general ever created. Animals. Perfect. 10 out of 10. Love it. Can't live without it at this point. That does it for the tier list and ranking. Thank you for watching. This has been a long undertaking, a real long video. I don't even know how long this footage has been at this point. Thank you for watching. Check out the Patreon if you want to see the full unedited reactions for $5 a month. You get every single Pink Floyd album reaction. You can just pay $5, watch them all, within a week or so, whenever you want. And that only costs you $5 to watch every video in the Pink Floyd discography on my channel unedited for $5 on Patreon. Or you can check the description down below for the playlist as well, where it is edited versions of every single album reaction for Pink Floyd. But, as always, my name is Randy Joe. I appreciate you watching, and I'm signing off.